this is such a terrible and a tragic story. Let's go put this up there on the screen, which is that we were hoping that 2021 was a flash in the pan as a result of the pandemic of a major increase in overdose deaths. Sorry, 2020. But overall, we now have initial data compiled by the CDC that the nation actually saw even more of an increase in deaths from overdoses in 2021 by 15%, Krystal. So that surge in overall deaths now overwhelmingly includes fentanyl and methamphetamine. And in some cases, actually, a combination of both.
Yeah.
And so right now, we have a catastrophic increase of deaths that have increased to 108,000 Americans who died last year of a drug overdose. 108,000. And we'll recall, last year, it actually overtook some of the other causes of death amongst people who are between 18 and 65. It's one of the most common ways now for people who are our age in order to die, is if they do die, is a result of a drug overdose. And actually, what's really nuts is if you consider the overall increase, 2020 was already a 30% increase year over year to 2019. And now we're up 15% 2021 on 2020. And actually, all current indications out of a lot of the people in the community are that this year will be just as bad, if not worse, as 2021. We did a lot of work in this country, 2017 onward, where we actually not dropped, but relatively stabilized the opioid overdose death rate. The pandemic destroyed that. It destroyed AA meetings, NA meetings. A lot of people went back and overdosed as a result of, there was isolation. New study just came out that said American friendships are at a record low. There's obviously all kinds of things that are happening. You combine that really with synthetic fentanyl and methamphetamine, which is largely coming from Chinese chemicals shipped over to Mexico, manufactured by the drug cartels and brought up over the border. Well, you now have a growing combination, what they point to, Krystal, in this article, known as speedballs and as goofballs, which is an increase in the use of stimulants and potent opioids, both of which are likely to be spiked with fentanyl. And so that is apparently one of the most common causes of almost immediate overdose and death on the American street. So it really is just a total disaster.
Let me read a little bit of this because I think this is actually really important because they say, the pandemic was definitely a contributing factor, There's no doubt about it, but it doesn't explain the entire spike, especially since you've continued to have an increase even after lockdown has eased. They say a recent study of illicit pills seized by drug enforcement authorities found a substantial share of what is marketed as Oxy, Xanax, or Adderall now contains fentanyl. So you've got kids who think they're getting Adderall or Oxy, and they're getting fentanyl.
Yeah, that's a very common way that people die in accidental overdose.
They say the spread of these counterfeit pills might explain a recent sharp increase in overdose deaths among teenagers who are less likely to inject drugs than older people. They talked to the Oregon Health Authority director. Apparently, Oregon has had a massive spike in overdose deaths. And Pat Allen said that, as was the case in other states with surging overdose deaths, the clear difference in 2021 was the ubiquity of fentanyl. Children as young as 12 are considered at high risk of obtaining counterfeit pills containing fentanyl. High schoolers are overdosing on them, believing they're opioid painkillers or anti-anxiety medication. The state was working to send naloxone toolkits to schools, similar to a program it's used in fast food restaurants where people were overdosing in bathrooms. And I have to say with all of this, that the reason that kids and people are dying at this rate, I mean, when you look at the facts of this, a big part of this is because of prohibition and the war on drugs. People don't want fentanyl. That's not what they think they're signing up for. And that's how they end up ultimately dead. So we know the pattern of, we know Purdue Pharma and how they pushed Oxy on, got people addicted to Oxy. But it's actually typically not the Oxy that kills them. It's when they get their script cut and the doctor won't give it to them anymore and they go to street drugs and they don't even know what they're getting or what they're taking. That's when people die. And so that's why when you look at this data and you look at what's happening and causing people to actually die, not just get addicted to drugs, that's how you can see very clearly, the the prevalence of fentanyl in these counterfeit pills is a direct result of our policies of prohibition in the war on drugs.
Yeah, I'll say I had a lot of my minds changed on. I still don't think we should legalize drugs. But Michael Schellenberger is somebody who pointed out the Portuguese model, which does seem to have a lot of benefits. I don't know if it can be replicated on the American system with federalism and all of that. But the basic premise is that over there, drugs are legal. But if you're an IV drug user just sitting in a park like the people are in San Francisco or in Los Angeles, like that's not going to happen. You're going to get arrested and you're going to get sent to treatment. And he's running for governor. I encourage people to go check him out. I think he's an interesting guy. And one of the things that he's pointed out is that we have a situation where a lot of these people need to be removed if they're going to be insisting on forcibly using drugs to outpatient facilities, like far away from the urban centers that are drug treatment. Already heroin and opioid recidivism is sky high, but it's kind of more of a paternalistic model, and that's hard to square for a lot of people. But the current system, I will agree with you, is completely nuts and insane, and people are dying.
At the very least, something that I've seen advocated for that I think makes a lot of sense, because obviously, listen, Biden's a drug warrior. I mean, he hasn't even descheduled marijuana, which he could personally do. And, it's extremely popular. It has like 80% approval rating at this point, and still won't even do that. So Biden is a drug warrior. I think it's ideological. I think he's always been that. I think he will always be that. But another thing you could do in terms of harm reduction, that doesn't go all the way to where we should go, which is ending the war on drugs completely. But if you made it easy for people to test what they have so they know what they're taking, that would at least, that would help in terms of harm reduction, so that if you think you're taking oxy, you're actually taking oxy, not fentanyl. If you think you're taking Xanax, you think you're taking Adderall. How many of you all took Adderall when you were in college or when you're in high school or even now?
Like commonly abused drugs.
Totally common. And you never would think, I'm going to take an Adderall and I could die.
It actually happened with Xanax. So I think it was Eric Bowling's son. His son died of fentanyl.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So listen, again, I don't encourage people to abuse drugs or whatever, although I have no problem with recreational drug use personally, and I think it's been demonized. That's another discussion for another day. But you should at least have the ability to know that what you think you're taking is what you're actually taking. And, the fact that fentanyl has become so ubiquitous in all of these illicit pills and black market drugs is just a complete health disaster, and it is killing our teenagers.
I don't know, though, if the testing strips would make all that much of a difference. So as I understand it, and again, this is from some YouTube videos and stuff I've watched with interviews of addicts who are on the street, a lot of them want fentanyl because it gets you really high. And so actually, I remember there was a funny interview with a guy who was like, look, man, I just do heroin. He's like, I don't want any of this. He's like one of the few guys on Skid Row who just wants to continue using heroin and not have anything fentanyl laced. But a lot of people actually who are opioid users, especially the ones who are deeply strung out, they want fentanyl. And a lot of them, they're okay with basically rolling the dice. So I'm not saying it wouldn't reduce anything. I do think we just need to move to a much more rehab-focused one. One of the things that they point to in here is that loosening permit take-home methadone treatment was very beneficial, actually. Look, a lot of this is going around on the edges, but I do think moving towards a much more of a forcible rehab type situation and a lack of permissiveness. Like what's happening in Los Angeles, I told you, I went to Skid Row. I was horrified. I've never seen anything like that in the Western world. And that's not a homeless problem, that's a drug problem. Like almost all of those people, and it's all are 100% strung out on drugs. And I'm not mad at them. I feel bad for them. Like it's a human tragedy. I had actually an Uber driver who picked me up in Skid Row, and he's like, yeah, 2 years ago, I was one of those guys. He said, I was sitting right out there on the street, and he told me about how he got arrested, how he turned his life around. But look, that's very much out of the norm.
That's the other part of the Portuguese model, which has been extremely successful by every count in terms of reducing addiction, reducing certainly overdose deaths. Is that if you are getting your hit in a clinic with government official, with people there who can get you help, then you are connected to the system. You're not disconnected from the system. And so, the moment that you're ready to say, I'm ready for, I want to change. Not only are you kept safe and it's incredibly important in terms of harm reduction, but then the minute you're ready to actually commit to making that change, that the resources are ultimately there for you. But, you know, again, with regards to these kids who are taking Oxy or Adderall and it ends up fentanyl and they end up dying, like, they're not looking for fentanyl.
That's a good point. Let's also talk, it's not just IV drugs, unfortunately. Let's put this up there on the screen. Alcohol use disorder deaths have risen during the pandemic. This is I mean, look, everybody knew that it was already happening, but this is from the Journal of American Medicine. So here's what they point to. Based on the figures from the last 8 years, deaths caused by alcohol use nationally are 22% higher than projected last year, Krystal. They were 25% higher already in 2020. So this isn't just heroin. This is legal, grade A alcohol. And look, I'll just tell you on a personal level, I drink probably 80% less than I used to. I feel better than I ever have in my whole life.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people who are out there, I understand, the social pressure and all of that, but alcohol is not good for you. It's incredibly bad, actually. And casual alcohol use can spiral for, 15-something% of the population into going to a direction that you don't want to go to. And there's a lot of cultural reasons why exactly that we don't address this, but this is a catastrophe. I mean, alcohol will kill you, as very obviously it killed millions of people just last year, and I don't think there's enough focus on. I think the people who hold my position on drugs and on recreational substance use and all that don't do nearly enough talking about alcohol. And alcohol, it kills a lot of people. A lot of people are suffering right now from alcohol use. I think it's a total catastrophe, and we need to have a serious conversation happening here, because I think this is all derivative, not all of it, but a lot of it is derivative of loneliness. I did that whole thing on friendship a couple months back. Most people just have a lot less friends than they did 20 years ago. Most people only report having like one or two friends. And in a lot of ways, work from home was a disaster because we oriented our entire culture to making it so the only friends that you make are at work. And so you work from home, you don't have a lot of friends. Loneliness is higher than it's ever been. Antidepressant use and all of that is sky high. Combining that with alcohol, which every antidepressant on earth, even though I'm against antidepressants, tells you not to do that.
Yeah.
So, you just have a whole cocktail of things that are flowing around in people's systems while their macro socio-political life is falling apart. I don't know. It's very concerning to me that alcohol use like this is just so high. And I don't think enough people are talking about it.
I'm a supporter of people doing whatever they need to do to get through the day. I'm not going to judge anyone for any of that. I will say I'm personally in a much happier and better place in my life right now. And I also, I barely drink. I had one drink last week and it was the first time in months.
And you're like, whoa.
Yeah. And so, I mean, the reason why you see skyrocketing drug use, skyrocketing alcohol use, skyrocketing anti-anxiety and depression use, medication use, it's all because people are miserable. They're lonely, they're disconnected, they don't have meaning in their life. I'm not going to say that's the only factor, but when you look at the fact that this country is an outlier on these measures, there's no doubt that this is a really clear indicator that we have failed our citizens on some really freaking basic levels.
Yeah.
So the fact that these skyrocketing overdose rates did not ease up, that they continued to escalate even as lockdowns eased, is yet another sign that, it's really dire and grim and stressful and depressing and lonely for far too many people out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.